educational system teaches us what to think, not how to think. And I think when you finalize, because even they tell you A is good, C is not so good, like they rank everything, right? Like they start building this sense of self-worth related to perfectionism or related to a ranking system and following the checklist. So very earlier on, we are very programmed to actually not create our life, to be survivors, to be in survival mode, reacting at all times. And I think our journey, Paola, and I'm sure many of your guests, has been one of transitioning from surviving to creating this beautiful life of fulfillment and abundance in every sense, because we can have it all. You know, as women, we can definitely have it all.
Hello and welcome back to Journey of a Fearless Female. I am your host, Paola Rosser, and this week my guest is Yanet. She is a self-mastery coach, a speaker, and a podcast host. She coaches high-achieving women to reprogram their mind so they could achieve their wildest dreams with clarity, confidence, and courage. She guides women to go from feeling unworthy to feeling unstoppable. Everybody, please welcome Yanet. Hi.
Hey, Paola, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. And I truly love this movement that you are creating here in this podcast. So thank you.
Well, I'm so excited to have you on. I met Yanet through Sunny, actually. She was on the podcast. If you go back and listen to Sunny's episode, she introduced us, and we are currently in a mastermind together. And I absolutely love your energy. I love the way you think. And I'm excited to have you here on the podcast. Let's start by telling your journey as a fearless female. Let's go back to the very beginning. Where did it start? Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Let's go.
All right, let's go.
I am ready. So, you know, I was born in Cuba, so I'm an immigrant. And when I was born, my mom had a dream. She had a vision that one day her daughter was going to have the opportunities she never had. For those of you maybe who are not familiar with Cuba, Cuba is a communist country and freedom is highly restricted there. You cannot even travel by your own decision. You have to consult with the government, and you can only travel under certain circumstances, mostly to work for the government. So this dream that my mom had, many would consider impossible because the odds of us leaving Cuba were none to zero. She didn't know how, we didn't have the resources, but her vision and her why were bigger enough to contrast any geographical or political limitations. So somehow, when I was 9 years old, she manifested us getting out of Cuba. She actually got an opportunity to work for the Cuban government in Mexico for 3 years.
Wow.
And after I know, crazy, right? Like she didn't know how we were gonna get there. She just kept believing and believing and believing in that vision. And for 3 years, she worked in Mexico, and we were supposed to go back because again, Cuba owns every person who is born there. You cannot just leave the country and that's it. You are not free. Like endpoint, you're not free. So after 3 years, we were supposed to go back, and she tells me, I was 12 years old, Yanet, we are not going back to Cuba, but you cannot tell your stepfather who was living with us. You cannot tell your friends. You cannot tell anyone because this is very risky. This is actually illegal on Cuba's eyes. So one day, you know, the opportunity arrived, and instead of going to the airport to go back to Cuba, we ran away. And after, I know it's just like, I know I'm telling it like it's my everyday story, but it's my life story has been kind of a crazy one.
Yeah.
And I think this fearless female stereotype, the first time I encountered this was my mom. I mean, as you can see, she was able to truly believe in that vision, truly believe in the opportunities and possibilities that were not there yet for me, her daughter, to have that freedom. So we ran away. We hid in another city in Mexico for 6 months. And then after 6 months, we asked for political asylum. In the border, we were granted asylum as Cubans. And then we moved to Puerto Rico because Puerto
Oh,
Rico is a US territory also.
okay. So before you go on, I am so curious because this is such a beautiful and interesting, and it's got all the parts of a movie because
Yes.
like seriously, I think people don't grasp the idea at how much the Cuban government has power and authority over their constituents. My stepson who's going to a Christian college, like one day on Thanksgiving said, "Oh my God, I think we should have communism here." And I'm like, "Do you even know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
You have a clue as to what you're saying right now at this dinner table? Like things are about to go crazy and your dad's going to be the first one to teach you a lesson." And I was just kind of like, it's still to this day, people think that, oh, if we just allow the government to take care of us, they will. And it's like, people don't understand. Like, I can't even imagine. It does take a fearless female like your mother to go against the government and say, I am not going back. No matter what, we're going to figure it out. So tell me about the day that your mom came and told you, like, we're running away. Don't tell your stepfather. So when you guys ran away, was it just the two of you? And how
Yeah.
did you feel that night? Was it at night? Was it the day? Please, I need more
Yes,
information.
it was just crazy. So, just background on my stepfather, because some people might be like, "Oh, they left part of the family, etc." So, they had a short-term relationship, and he actually cheated on her after they
Mm-hmm.
got married. She realized when she got to Mexico to work for the government with him, and that's when the relationship started deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
And as time passed, her intention, I don't think, and she told me, my intention was not to not go back to Cuba. Yeah, of course, I had my vision, but I also had my partner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was working for the national security of Cuba. So it wasn't as easy as talk to him and let's all stay together.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to
And he
run
already
that,
showed his loyalty.
and
So,
he already showed. So there were many things kind of brewing which made sense for her
mhm.
to actually make that decision. So I just
No, I
wanted
think
to,
she's a badass.
she's a badass. Anyway, so I was 12 years old, and I remember that night. So that night, my friends from Mexico, they had prepared a surprise party for me because I was going back to Cuba to say goodbye to me. So my mom tells me earlier that night, I think it was around the afternoon, and she basically tells me, "Hey, you cannot tell your friends. I know you have this surprise party, and you cannot tell your stepfather. This is highly sensitive." In the brain of a child, me, I was like, I don't know why, but I was like, okay, I'll trust my mom, to be honest
Mm-hmm.
with you. Let's go with it. Like I didn't question it. I didn't I don't remember at least feeling like sad or creating this drama. I later learned to integrate what happened in my childhood when I was an adult. Because
Mm-hmm.
even though I thought that didn't have an impact right there, later on I realized that, of course, it did subconsciously.
Yeah.
And as an adult, I had to integrate all of that. But I remember going to a surprise party, and of course, I couldn't say anything. Oh, yeah, I'm going to Cuba. And, like, you have to put that kind of like front, like that
Mm-hmm.
farce in a way, because of course it's very risky for someone to know. I mean, not even our family in Cuba, of course, could know. So
Yeah.
we would be in communication with them. But later on, my grandmother told me, we noticed your mom in the last calls being weird, but we didn't know what was going on, because
Yeah.
she couldn't say anything. Also, the Cuba government records all, everything is highly monitored in Cuba.
Wow.
It's highly controlled in Cuba. And I went to my friend's surprise party for me. They gifted me tons of things like cards, toys. And when we got back home, my mom tells me, hey, I know they gave you all of these, but we need to put all of these in the trash because we can only take, you take one bag, I take one bag, and that is it. So as a child, again, I was like, okay, I mean, at least I remember that. But again, all of those things can be intense.
Yeah, it's a huge, it just reminds me of like, I've watched a lot of movies about World War II and the
Yeah,
Nazis and like the Jews and like how the Jewish people were like, okay, I have to leave and I could only take one bag. And I just
exactly.
can't even imagine like, right now I live and it's nothing comparable, but like I live next to a brush and this area always has like huge fires. And I'm
Yeah,
always thinking, like, in the back of my mind, if a huge fire comes and engulfs this huge mountain, what am I going to take with me last minute to get out of there? Because it really is like a fire drill. You have to get out of there.
exactly.
And I love that you said you can't tell anyone, because when I'm watching these movies of people who are trying to get past, the government or the regime, even if you just tell the one person, like a friend or the neighbor or something, they are going to be so quick to tell on you and throw you under the bus for whatever reason that the regime or the government tells
Yeah.
them, like, I'll give you $100, or I'll give you a trip to Disneyland, just tell me where they're at, and they're like, fine, I'll tell you, like, because people are very self-serving. So I loved that you not only kept your secret, but you also like trusted that your mom knew what she was doing.
Totally. And so many times people in these kind of regimes, they have a lot of fear. So everything is fear driven, all the decisions they are making. And my mom just transcended that fear because, again, her aspiration of freedom, her why was so much bigger than any limitation, any fear, anything, right? And I remember us putting all of those toys in the trash and just packing our bags for Cuba, sure, because again, we were living with my stepfather. And the day arrived, and my stepfather used to leave around 5 a.m. to work for, his job. He had an undercover job for the government. I remember he left at 4 or 5 a.m. And my mom is like, okay, get up. Like, we have to do this really quickly because we had paid for someone to be waiting for us downstairs to take us to another place, just a whole process.
Yeah.
And I started getting ready. And suddenly my mom tells me, okay, get back into bed that your stepfather just came back.
No
And
way.
yeah, I know it's kind of crazy.
This is like a movie.
Yes, he had forgotten to drink his coffee.
Oh my gosh, really?
I mean, we are Cubans. We gotta have our coffee, our espresso
Yes.
in the morning. And I remember me being dressed already, just getting back into bed like I was sleeping. And he drank his coffee. He left super quickly because he had already left for work. Um, I got out of bed. We prepared everything super ready, super quick, and someone was waiting for us downstairs. And then that person took us to León, Mexico, which is another city in Mexico. And the person who was helping us, he was in Puerto Rico, basically told us, you just have to wait there until we tell you when it's a good time to cross the border and ask for political asylum. So we
Mhm.
did it. That was another moment of uncertainty. We didn't know how long we were going to stay in this. It was like a small apartment, probably the size of my office right now, like super small. I remember the bed, the bathroom, all of it was just together. We were just hiding there because no one could know our location by any means.
Yeah.
At this point, the government is, when they realize we are gone, they are like, they ran away or were they kidnapped? My mom didn't leave a note or anything, so they are trying to figure out, did they run away or were they kidnapped, which
Yeah.
in Mexico every now and then happens, and
Yes.
Cubans running away every now and then happens for them, right?
Hmm.
So somehow, I don't know, they kind of like later on realized that we probably ran away. They called our family in Cuba. Our family in Cuba didn't have idea of what we did because we couldn't tell anyone. It was just a crazy moment on the other side, but we didn't
Yeah.
know what was happening. We were just hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to cross that border and get to freedom.
And did you stay in that small little apartment, like probably covered up the windows? Did you ever leave that apartment to go get food or anything, or was food and everything brought to you?
Food was brought to us. I remember leaving maybe once or twice, but we had to be very careful because also like Cuba and Mexico, they have great relationships. So there are Cubans working in Mexico like everywhere. So we just had to be very careful, but we limited honestly the times that we went out of fear of being found for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you stayed there for 6 months. You got asylum at the border, and now you're in Puerto Rico.
I was in Puerto Rico, and this my vision of a child of I want to be able to give back to my mom, to my family, because my mom sacrificed her family, I mean our family, like literally when we leave Cuba and we commit this act of asking for political asylum, that's considered a big no-no.
Yeah.
When are we gonna see our family again? No idea. Maybe never. It wasn't never, but there is so much uncertainty. You just did a big illegal thing on Cuba's eyes. So in my mind was always this responsibility as a child earlier on, recognizing the sacrifice that my mom had and me feeling that responsibility to be able to give back to her, to give back to my family, to make sure that what she did, I was giving my best effort and I was just successful in every sense.
Mm-hmm.
So earlier on, I'm like, okay, I have to get A's, I have to follow the rules. And I mean, this Puerto Rico is similar to Cuba, so it wasn't a big deal. But I remember getting into high school in Puerto Rico, and it was an all girls school. I didn't know English. All the textbooks were in English. It was just kind of an identity shock, also as a child.
Yeah.
And because my mission was to be able to give back, I ended up studying chemical engineering. Like I was
Oh,
really
oh
great.
my gosh.
I
Chemical
was
engineering. Out of all the books that you could pick up to read when they're not in your language. Chemical
it's
engineering.
it's kind of funny. Like I was really good at chemistry, and someone told me because here's the other thing. As an immigrant, I didn't. I mean, my mom was focused on surviving, on bringing the bread to the table. She used to make well, that's the maximum she has made, FYI, but she was making like maybe $8 $7 an hour, like 32K a year.
Mm,
And so I cannot imagine myself, and I may get emotional, but 32K a year, you have an only child, you just came into this country, it's just a tough journey.
yeah.
And she was just focused on survival. She didn't know the educational system. She didn't know anything. So I had to figure things out on my own. And someone mentioned, engineers, they have a really great salary. And I'm like, chemistry, engineering, chemical engineering, which has nothing to do with just I mean, we do a lot of chemistry, but it's not like I thought was gonna be in high school.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, it was kind of like a blind decision of like money and something I like, let's go.
Yeah.
And I just went for it. And I did chemical engineering again, like really good grades, got leadership positions, did all the internships that I was supposed to do, literally followed this success checklist of
Mm-hmm.
what people told me success was, like money and reputation, and I got hired by a great company in the United States, all of that stuff. And when I got hired by this company in Houston, in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, I made it. That's it. You know, like I've
Yeah,
followed
because
it.
you've always wanted to get to America and now you've gotten there. And not only did you get there, you have this amazing job. And yes, it is the American dream. And it's especially going back to your earliest, childhood, leaving Cuba to get to America to have the job that you have in chemical engineering. It is the ultimate dream.
It was crazy. And I was like, and I was making six figures, 23 years old. I'm like, I'm done for the rest of my life. I'm good. And then after a year of working there as a chemical engineer, I realized that I was perceived by everyone outside of me to be this successful person. But inside of me, that job, chemical engineering, the people, the environment was not fulfilling me. And I
Mm.
just felt empty. You know, I had the money, I had these things, and I felt completely empty. And you know how people say they go through midlife crisis? I went through a big crisis when I was 23 years old. And I'm like,
You're so
wait,
young.
I know, but I'm like, I've done everything I was told to do in order to belong, right? In order to be
Mm.
successful. Belonging for me was safety in the
Yeah.
deepest sense. And I didn't feel fulfilled. And I just had this sense of like, no, but I owe it to these people to continue tolerating this pain that I'm feeling right now because I feel empty. And I was in a very stressful job. I was a process engineer. I was on call 24/7. They would call me at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., on the weekends at 1 a.m. It was just a combination of everything. And
Mm-hmm.
my intuition started saying, Janet, you got to do something about it. This is not aligned at all. But I
Yeah.
kept ignoring it. And it became louder and I kept ignoring it. And it became louder and I kept ignoring it until the pain goes so intense that it became intolerable. And I had a panic attack, you know.
Oh.
I know you're like, oh my God, I thought the climax of the story was back then, but then I'm having this crisis when I think I've achieved success.
Yeah. No, it's actually very common. Like I have so many people on my podcast that have similar stories, but
Yeah,
like even I can relate. Like I did the same thing. I went to school, I graduated from college. I remember crying in the shower like after I graduated from college and I was working my corporate job and I was just crying. I'm like this can't be life. Like I'm only 23, 24 years old and I have to do this for the next 40 years.
crazy.
And I just remember this can't be it. And I think like when you're in the schooling process, you're like, oh, next thing is high school. Next step is college. Next step is, and you go down the checklist of what society has told you to do. I've even had some people on my podcast, they're like, and then I got married and then I had the baby and then I bought the house. And you go down the checklist, check, check, check. But we never stop to think, okay, this is what society is telling us to do. But what does my soul want me to do? What is
Exactly.
my actual mission? What is my purpose? What makes my soul sing?
Exactly. You're so right. The educational system teaches us what to think, not how to think. And I
Mm,
think when you finalize, because even they tell you A is good, C is not so good, like they rank everything, right? Like they start building this sense of self worth related to perfectionism or related to a ranking system and following the checklist. So, very earlier on, we are very programmed to actually not create our life, to be survivors, to be in survival mode, reacting at all times. And I think our journey, Paola, and I'm sure many of your guests, has been one of transitioning from surviving to creating this beautiful life
yeah,
of fulfillment and abundance in every sense, because we can have it all, you know, as
yeah.
women, we can definitely have it all.
So
But
take
yeah,
us back to that day that you had the panic attack. Where were you? How did it feel? What was your first initial reaction?
oh my God, let me tell you. So my intuition, when we ignore it, if we don't take action on our intuition, it ends up manifesting on the physical body. And that's where panic attacks and all of these things come to light. And I remember I had finished working night shifts, 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for 13 days straight. I would get one day off every 2 weeks of working 12 hours night shifts. And I was just burned out, to be honest with you. And earlier on, I started feeling this, earlier on, meaning like months ago, before that event, I started feeling this pressure on the chest, some anxiety building up. And I remember I had transitioned just into days, and it was my free weekend. But even in my free weekend, I needed to work from my computer because I was monitoring the reactor temperature so they could introduce the oil because they were starting up the unit. Anyways, all that technical stuff.
Yeah.
And I was monitoring this. My mom from Puerto Rico, she had just moved in with me. And she was like, Janet, I need to get milk in the grocery store. She didn't have her car yet. She doesn't speak English. So sometimes I help her to do certain things that she's not comfortable with. And I wanted to meet her needs. I'm here trying to meet the work needs. And I'm like, okay, I need to take my mom really quickly. Based on my calculation, it will take like 2 hours for the reactor temperature to get there. Anyways, so I leave, take her to a grocery store. And I had in my mind, oh my God, what if they call me and I'm in the grocery store getting milk? What if I just had PTSD with my phone because they would call me, I swear, at all times because they had an environmental incident or something weird happened. And I just kept working that up on my mind. And suddenly I feel this chest pressure. My left arm goes numb completely. And in my mind, and when I Googled, of course, I'm having a heart
attack.
Yes. I'm like, well, this is it. Now, my mom cannot drive to emergency. And I'm like, wow, I cannot believe that I'm having a heart attack and I have to drive. But, anyways, that's another topic.
And how old were you at this point that you're like, I'm having a heart attack?
I was like 24. It was like a year
You're
after
young.
24 years old. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
So I'm driving to emergency, and in the drive to emergency, I'm like, wow, if I die today, is this the life that I've been tolerating instead of the life that I've been creating? And I just start questioning myself, man. I've been told, I've known this for a year now. I mean, not that much, but it was a lesson for me of like, I'm tolerating all this pain, thinking that I owe things to people, being afraid to speak up because I didn't feel I was worthy, of like asking for what I need. And I've been here in this place, like, I'm gonna die today. That's just not okay. I get to emergency. They do like an electrocardiogram to make sure my heart is beating. And 8 hours after, they give me the results. So during that 8 hours period, I realized I wasn't dying because clearly I'm waiting 8 hours here in emergency for my results. And when the doctor sees me, he's like, you just need a glass of wine and you just need to relax because this was a panic attack. He literally told me that, and I'm here like, I've never had a panic attack. I didn't know what that was, to be honest with you. And I'm like, okay, thank you, doctor. That's great. I didn't get that glass of wine, I don't think, but that Sunday, I drafted my resignation letter.
Nice.
And I'm like, to me, that was a turning point of like, this is it. I'm not going to wait until crisis hits or until I touch rock bottom ever again to make a decision that I already knew was aligned with me, with my soul, with my intuition, with all of it. And in the heat of the moment, I'm like, I'm not going to sacrifice my health. So I draft a resignation letter, my young self. And I schedule like at 2 a.m. a meeting with my supervisor for like 10 a.m. the next day. And I print the resignation letter in the company's print. funny enough. And I'm like, okay, I'm so nervous, but this is it. Like, I'm done with these people, okay?
Yeah.
And anyways, I'm like 10 a.m. in his office, and I'm like, where is this guy? He's late. He's never late. Like, I'm freaking out, right? And then he texts me, hey, I'll be there in a second. I'm just finishing a meeting. Okay, cool. So he gets there. I have my envelope with my resignation letter. And I basically tell him, hey, I've been going through this. I don't think this is aligned with me anymore. I didn't have a backup. By the way, I don't recommend doing this, but I'm just telling what I did simply, like in that moment, impulsively and intuitively at the same time. And he said, well, we don't want to lose you, so what do you need for you? What do you need from us for you to stay? And I'm like, well, I don't need anything. I just want to leave. I was in that mindset. And then there is another supervisor that takes me to lunch, and she's like, okay, Janet, let's be smart about this. What would you need? Do you need a leave of absence? I promise, if you, for example, take a leave of absence and you come back, like, we are going to help you align with what you feel is in better alignment with you. She was super now. She was a woman. She used to lead a women's organization there. So she was very nice. And I'm like, maybe I need to be smarter about this move. So after thinking about it, I went back and I said, here's what I need. So this was my first time. I had to hit crisis to tell my supervisor and my work what I actually needed from them. And it
Yeah.
was a lot after that. I'm like, okay, I need 2 months leave of absence, no pay. They were like, well, but you can try to do it through medical and you will get paid a little bit. And I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, I just need to leave, need a 2 months break. And I took 2 months leave of absence, and I said, whenever I come back, I'm gonna do my research and I'm gonna find the organization that better aligns with I am as a person and with my values. And they were like, okay, no problem. So they gave me that, which I'm very grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 months after, I thought I was going to feel like an imposter, but I was just so, I walked in that place like I belonged after 2 months. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, in this place, taking leave of absence like that is a big career killer. And also asking to be transferred to another organization is also a big career killer. They later on did something that affected me a little bit, but I was able to get back on and I did better. And there are many strategic things I didn't know at that moment. Okay. So I just
Yeah.
was doing the best I could with the
Yeah.
resources I had.
I love that earlier, and you've been saying it throughout your interview, is that you had these intuition moments, these intuitive senses that kept telling you. I like to call them the whispers of the world. I like to feel like your angels or your spiritual guides. When you're out of alignment or you're going down the wrong path, they kind of like tap you on the shoulder to remind you that's not the way you're supposed
Yes,
to be going. But I love that you
totally.
said that, like, you ignored them and you just kept ignoring them and you kept pushing them and repressing them. And then eventually it like manifested into this huge panic attack where you felt like you were having a heart attack. And I think that if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple, or if you're watching this on YouTube, if you are having these intuition moments where you feel like you need to make a change in your life, or you are getting whispers of the world or signs. I get lots of signs and you're ignoring them. Trust that they will soon hit you over the head like a hard brick because you are going down the wrong path or you're not fulfilling your soul's contract. Like, I totally believe in that. I mean, I've had my own like brick to the head moments where I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time and I'm not supposed to be going down there. I'm not supposed to be dating that person. I'm not supposed to be working here. I'm not supposed to be hanging out with these people. But like, really pay attention to those moments. If you're listening or watching, pay attention. And I love that she said she didn't have a plan. There was no backup plan. And even if you listen to the beginning where she's talking about her mom leaving Cuba, she had no backup plan. She had no idea what it was going to be outside of that comfort zone. She had no clue how it was going to pan out. All she knew was that she had a vision, she had a dream, and she can see it and feel it. And that's the most important part when you're trying to manifest and create the life that you want. You don't need to know the how. You just need to follow your intuition and trust in the unfolding of your life. Like I've left many jobs myself where I had a boss who treated me like shit. And I just remember saying, I quit. And he was like, you can't quit. And I'm like, yes, I can. Like we have so much more power. We have way more freedom than someone who lives in Cuba. And yet we don't take advantage of these freedoms and these amazing like possibilities in this country. And I love that you said, you know what, I'm going to figure it out. I don't have a plan. Just give me 2 months and then I'll figure it out. And I love that you even said they tried to like throw something at you, but you figured it out anyways.
I did. And I think sometimes we are so afraid of uncertainty, but uncertainty is the only place where creation happens because we cannot predict the future. So that's exactly where I was. And even when I came back, I decided, when I came back, even in those 2 months, I'm like, number one thing, I got to get to know myself. Right, because there is no way I can align further to and I can create my why, my vision, if I don't know myself at a deepest level. Like what moves me, what are my values, and also grieving this identity of the chemical engineer and embracing the new identity of. Later on I realized that coaching and speaking was my passion when I took my first coaching certification back in 2015, in this process of getting to know myself. And there I said, one day, I don't know how, I don't know when, but one day I'm going to be a full-time coach and speaker. I have no idea how to get there. But what's important to me is to be authentic, fulfilled, and to help people that way,
Yeah.
aligning with who I am, like being in integrity with myself and adding value to people. And even my corporate career, I started making decisions to align to that vision. I went from engineering to supply chain, was more people oriented, loved it. From supply chain to consulting, more people oriented, very service oriented, loved it. And in 2021, someone super close to me, and he was the one who taught me about meditation, about neurolinguistic programming back in 2012. Because in 2012, we got the opportunity to go back to Cuba after 12 years of not seeing our family. So we
Really?
didn't see our family for 12 years.
Wow.
And then right before I started working in corporate, we visited. Thankfully, everything went well. And my uncle, he taught me about, I think that was in my life path. My uncle being that mentor that brought personal development and self-development into my life that later on evolved into who I am now and my business and serving people in this way. And in 2021, he passed away from cancer. And it
Mm.
was just so hard on me. I was grieving. And even though I was in consulting, which is something I loved, I still had my side coaching business. And I just wanted to make an aligned decision after he passed away. And I decided to quit my corporate job, not because I hated what I had, not because I was moving away from it, but because I was moving towards a bigger aspiration. I didn't want anymore to wait until crisis hits and until I hated everyone and I couldn't tolerate anyone to make that decision. And for me, was in 2021 where I decided to go full in my
Into
business as a
coaching.
coach and speaker. And I think spiritually, death has been one of my biggest spiritual teacher. When I thought I was dying in my panic attack, when my uncle passed away, it's such a beautiful, it humbles you down and it teaches you that this life in the physical body, energetically, is not temporary, but in the physical body, it is. So it's really important to make decisions that are aligned with our hearts and souls. So
Yeah.
that's how everything evolved. But I work with high achieving women, and this feeling of knowing that we are worthy of making these decisions, of speaking up, of following our souls, our hearts, it's really important. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to go through these hard moments for us to be like, of course, I'm worthy of asking for what I need. Of course, I'm worthy of finishing this relationship, this job. And that was the journey that I had to go through
Yeah.
myself.
Oh my gosh. I love that you said in those 2 months you had to figure out who you were, outside of being the chemical engineer. And I think, like, if you think about it, um, you spend the first part of your life in school and education being programmed to what other people's expectations are,
Yeah,
whether it's your family, whether it's your community, your religious sector, or, education wise, or even your corporate job. But then it takes a lot of time to deconstruct that person and go back home to you, which is what you
totally.
did. You went back home to who you are, the essence of who you are, back to your own soul that makes you light up the world and help others do the same, which is what I love about coaching, because it's so much more than just manifesting the house and the car and the money in the bank account. It's so much more than that, because like you said, you had that. You had the education, you had the car, you had the six-figure job, you had the title, and it's like a lot of people don't understand, if you do not work with the inside version of who you are, the outside stuff will never be enough. You will constantly be looking for more. You will constantly be trying to soothe the person inside of you. And so, yes, beautiful story, Yanet. I love it, love it, love it. You really need to consider making a movie, because I could visually see your mom and you in Mexico, and just like coming into Puerto Rico and you going to school and not knowing the language. It's such an incredible story, and I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. I always think to myself, like, what would I do if I was placed in a different country and I didn't know the language, and I would have to start over my whole entire life? And you guys didn't even have family to, like, be a supportive network. And it's just a beautiful reminder of how resilient we are as human beings, and that you don't need to have like a backup plan or a safety net or even a support network. You're still going to figure it out and find a way to make it.
I love that so much. And I think, I mean, you mentioned this, the important part is to go inward, because this is where everything starts, and just get to know yourself, really tap into that worthiness that many women we struggle with, thinking that we are not enough, thinking that we have to please others and sacrifice others in order for us to be successful. Or sometimes we feel we need to overdo things to prove that we are enough of belonging there. So I think that is super important, but mainly the part of like get to know yourself at the deepest level, because that's the only way that you're going to start making those aligned decisions and fulfilling decisions, because everyone who is listening, you deserve the best and you're more than enough.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so as we wrap up this episode, Enette, what would be your nugget of wisdom for anyone who is listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube right now?
So the first one that comes to mind, which goes back to my whole journey, is alignment attracts abundance.
Mm.
Even when I went from engineering to supply chain, people were like, "Oh, that's a step down, don't do it." But because I took an aligned decision and I loved it so much more, I did so much better than the people who stayed back hating what the place and the role that they had in their job. So I think alignment attracts abundance. The more you align with your soul's purpose, the more abundance, the more worthiness you're going to attract into your life to make your wildest dreams possible.
Yes, your wildest dreams. And this is the wildest dream of your mom and you. And it's just an incredible story of resilience. Ah, definitely a journey of a fearless female. Okay, how can my audience find you and work with you?
Amazing. So they can find me on Instagram. My handle is Yanet B Coaching, Yanet with Y. I'm also very active on LinkedIn under Yanet Borrego, or you can go to my website, ybcoaching.com. Of course, if coaching is something that interests you, there is a tab there where you can schedule a free clarity call.
Yes, love it. Thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Paola. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again for listening to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser. If you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual mentor, you can book a free discovery call with me at www.fearlessfemale.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at fearlessfemale_coach, subscribe to my YouTube channel at fearlessfemale, or find me on TikTok. I'm under at paola.rosser. And if you love this episode, make sure you hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a review. I read every single review, and I truly appreciate the time you spend writing it.